much for coming. Stacey and I are co-chairs with Rediscover Mapledale, and you can always look at our website or follow us on social media to get more information.
Yeah. So I'll do a brief introduction here. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank Dr. Bellinger for coming and doing this for us. He gave a version of this talk at Fall Fest a few months ago for us, and we did our best to get a filmed version of it. But all we had was cell phones and a dream and a rainstorm, so so now we're getting it officially with Stow TV. We're very grateful to them for helping us out. I'm Stacey Goldman. I am the co-chair along with Kelly Lawler of Rediscover Mapledale. Rediscover Mapledale is an all-volunteer committee of Stow residents who are really interested in making the story of Mapledale Country Club more well-known both within Stow, across Massachusetts, and also across the country, because we think this is a really important story. Mapledale Country Club, and Bob will talk about this a little bit more in depth, but it was one of the first country clubs built, owned, and operated by a black man for black golfers in the country. And it happened here in Stow, Massachusetts. We're very, very proud. And actually, when we think about Stow, people largely think about apples and golf. That's like our identity here.
And butternut squash.
And butternut squash, that's true. And the roots of our golf history lie also shared with the roots of black history here in the Mapledale Country Club. So it's really important to us that we tell this story, that we talk about how important it was for our town, how important this story was nationally in the story of black golf and black sport in general. And we just want to make everybody as aware as possible of it. We have a project that we're working on right now to put interpretive signage, so information about the history of the country club on the Mapledale Trail that now surrounds the exterior of Stow Acres Country Club. Stow Acres is where Mapledale was located. We're very excited about that. And we're very excited to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the founding of Mapledale in 2026. And we are fundraising for that regularly. So you can visit our website, rediscovermapledale.org, and we would be very happy to have you go there, look at our project, maybe make a donation towards our future work. Before I introduce Dr. Bellinger a little more thoroughly, I just want to thank our partners. So the Mass Cultural Council, so the local cultural councils have given us money through grants for our projects. We want to thank the Freedom's Way National Heritage Area, which has also given us very generous grants. And then we have many, many important local partners. Of course, the Stow Historical Society and the support and volunteer support of Marilyn Zaworski, for which we are very, very grateful. The Nashoba Valley Rotary, which has both offered us volunteer support and granting support. And also, what am I missing? I'm missing one. Kelly can't remember. I feel terrible. Or no, maybe it was the Cultural Council.
Yeah, and it's Lancaster, Stow, and Bolton.
Yeah, they've all given us
specific
funding, which is incredible. We're
That's
very, very excited. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Bellinger. Robert Bellinger is a public historian with a background in Black studies and almost half a century of experience as an educator. He has served as a consultant and historian for documentary films, most notably the well-received documentary Birth of a Movement. Dr. Bellinger has been engaged in public history projects at historic sites, monuments, and installations. Recently, Dr. Bellinger completed a research project with the Lexington Historical Society on the history of Black people in Lexington, 1690 to 1800, to expand the understanding and interpretation of the history of this Massachusetts community. And if I understand, he also serves on a number of boards in Lexington as well. He serves on boards including the Robbins House in Concord and the Shirley Eustace House in Roxbury. Most recently, he was elected to the board for Middleton Place in Charleston, South Carolina. I'll pass it over to Bob, and at the end, we'll have time for questions. So yeah, take it away.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Kelly, for inviting me, and thank you all for coming out this evening. It's before the dinner hour, so I don't think I'll put anyone to sleep. It's early enough. This is wonderful to be here. As a public historian, it's wonderful to work with Mapledale and the projects involved in that. It's exciting because it's local history, and it's people involved in telling the history of the place that they live, the place that they care about. And so for me, that's always exciting. And what I found is that local histories, that are done by residents, that are done by historical societies, really provide a depth of insight that you don't get anywhere else about those communities. And it's those communities that are the foundation for the history of the country. And so it's really exciting for me to be part of this. What I hope to do this evening is to not only talk about Robert Hawkins and Mapledale, but to present him in a way that connects to the history of sports in the United States, to African American history in the United States, and also to American history. Because we are, as mentioned, in a couple of years, we'll be celebrating the 100th anniversary of Mapledale, but also the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So it's a nice kind of dovetailing of events, and I think this story goes well with that. Well, as we know, in the late 19th century in the United States, sports was becoming a big thing. It was something that was captivating folks from all different directions, particularly as the population became more urban and less connected to the rigors of rural life. Sports became a very, very big activity. And we find this particularly at colleges, right? At colleges, one of the earliest interscholastic activities was track and field. And so people were competing in all those events. But we also know that at colleges, baseball was becoming an activity that people engaged in. In baseball, the American pastime was played all over the country, from schoolboys up through to the professional level, which was beginning at this time period. But baseball was a team sport, as others were, such as football, which was big at the colleges during this time period, and everyone loved football. And by the 1870s, when the Ivy Leagues were playing football on Thanksgiving, it connected baseball, football to Thanksgiving, right? Which it still is, right? But we also saw athletics through organizations like the YMCA and the YWCA. And through them, in 1891, we know James Naismith invented basketball in Springfield, Massachusetts. And 4 years later, William G. Morgan invented volleyball at a YMCA in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And it was to be a winter sport that was less physical than baseball, than basketball was. Because basketball in those early days, people went to war with each other. But outside of college, there were individual sports that were being played. Because these were all team sports and required others to be part of it. One of those sports was tennis, and which was introduced to the U.S. in 1874. And by the early 1880s had the first national championship, and by 1900 the Davis Cup was founded in Massachusetts, right? So Massachusetts is a very big part of sports history, but it's also a time when golf begins to be part of the American sports landscape. And golf is really in the 1880s. It begins to be played more widely, or widely, I should say. A lot of golf histories point to the 1888 formation of St. Andrew's Golf Club in Yonkers as the beginning of golf in the United States. They were formed to establish the game of golf in the U.S. It was a man named John Reed from Scotland originally, and four of his friends who were known as the Apple Tree Gang, as a reference to the apples that you're talking about. And they began playing in Yonkers. And then they established a clubhouse there, which the description is that it was an oak tree where they used to hang their coats and a bottle of whiskey. But that became one of the earliest golf clubs. In 1882, something else happened. This was also a time period when country clubs were being formed. And the first one, in 1882, took the name the Country Club. And it was founded in Brookline, Massachusetts. And it became one of the forerunners of other country clubs that would be founded. And through this late 19th century, more of them were formed. In 1894, the St. Andrews Club, the Country Club, and three others came together to create the United States Golf Association, the USGA. And they elected Theodore Augustus Havemeyer as their president. I just mentioned his name because it's a wonderful name, the way it rolls off the tongue. But his family, they were pretty much ran the Sugar Trust in the United States. So they were people of power and influence, and he was the president. I'll mention him again briefly later. But all of these organizations and clubs were private, and they definitely did not admit black people. However, during these same years, African Americans were playing golf. They were playing in fields, in parks, and on courses. One example of an early golfer is George Francis Grant, who played near his home in Arlington Heights. And George Grant was an interesting person. He was a trained dentist, and he was the first black faculty member at Harvard when he was hired to be a member of the Harvard dental school faculty in mechanical dentistry. He developed a method for treating cleft palate, and that was something that he became well known for. His daughter, Frances, recalls caddying for him as early as the mid-1880s. Right? And that's when he would play in fields near his home in Arlington Heights. And, you know, at this time period, as golf courses were being developed, people still played in fields where the holes were not well established. They'd create them, you know, and you'd have to, you know, find the balls, sometimes avoid cattle who may be in the field and other things. So it was still a rough game, but he played there. And one of the things that we know is that he did not play alone. He played with others who he knew from Harvard and places such as that. One person who played with him was Archibald Grimke, who was the half-brother of the abolitionists Sarah and Angelina Grimke, who you may know about or have heard about. And Angelina taught for a school for a while in Lexington, Massachusetts, the town I'm from. But he was a lawyer. And one of his colleagues, Butler R. Wilson, also played there with Mr. Grant. And Butler R. Wilson was a lawyer, an activist in Boston, and one of the things about him, as a little tidbit I'll throw out, he, along with William Henry Lewis, who also was a resident of Massachusetts while he was at Harvard, and a guy from Minneapolis, William Morrison, were the first three black attorneys to be admitted to the American Bar Association in 1912. It created a bit of a kerfluffle because the Bar Association said we did not know they were black and wanted to kick them out. But at the time, William Henry Lewis was Assistant Attorney General of the U.S., and the Attorney General said, if you kick them out, I quit. And they couldn't lose that most influential person, so they stopped. But after that, the application had a category of race that had to be included. But to get back to George Grant, he was a creative person, and he got tired of the practice of making little hills of sand to tee off. And so he created a wooden golf tee, which he patented in 1899, right? And so Massachusetts brings the golf tee. And one of the things about him, though, is he was not really that much of a business person. And he had many of them made, and his daughter said he'd give them out to friends and, so forth. And they were all over the house. But he never made any money from it because he never tried to market it or sell it. But he is credited with the first golf tee. Now, what is interesting is while they were playing, there were still other ways that African Americans were involved in golf. One, at many of these golf courses that were opening or country clubs, they often served as cooks and laborers and stewards there. They were sometimes attendants with the responsibility for cleaning and repairing golf clubs. They were groundskeepers who had the responsibility of maintaining the course. And in some cases, they even, their labor was used in building the courses, and in some cases, they even designed courses. But they were also, most notably, in the position of caddies. And this was very significant. As it was said, caddies did more than just lug bags and find balls. As a description said, a caddy had to have good familiarity with the game and a knowledge of the golf course. They had to be able to tell the golfer which club to use, the distance from tee to green, the way the wind might blow on the course, and the type of grass on the greens and how it affected the movement of the ball. The caddy also had to be able to size up the abilities and qualities of those they worked for, right? That's a lot. That's a lot, and I'll come back to the significance of that. But as a result of that, sometimes they also taught at golf courses, especially beginners, because they had skills from knowing the game from all of those different angles. Now, there was a concern at this time period also, as golf was developing and as the professional game was coming forward. There was a concern that was often voiced in newspapers because golf was catching on. At the beginning, in early 1890s, there was a feeling golf would not catch on. And one of the funniest things I read was in a New York Herald article in 1891, one of the things the person was saying was that golf was not going to catch on in America. And some of the reasons given were, in the first place, it compels the spectator to walk through rugged country. The Americans who would care to foot it over hill and dale for many hours in pursuit of a small ball are very rare. Then it is much less showy game than baseball. Lastly, and this I fancy is not the last of the causes which will make it fashionable, it is expensive. Needless to say, none of these things were a deterrent to the growth and spread of golf, and it did not stay among the elite only. And that's one of the interesting things, is the way that golf just spread. And the feeling was, where are the American-born professionals going to come from? Because in the 1890s, all the professional golfers were from Scotland and England or other countries in Europe, and any of the competitions included them. There were no American-born professionals. And there was an article that wrote and said, it's perhaps from the ranks of the caddies that the first American-born professionals will come. And one article in the, I believe it was in the Fall River newspaper, identified one particular person as a potential, a 16-year-old African-American named John Shippen. And Shippen, he was born in 1879 in Washington, D.C., to parents who were formerly enslaved. This is just 9 years before Robert Hawkins was born, to give you that time period. His father was a school teacher, but and 4 years after John was born, his father was ordained as a Presbyterian minister. And when John was 9 years old rather, his father went to serve at the Shinnecock Indian Reservation in Long Island. And John went with him and grew up there on the Shinnecock Reservation among the members of the tribe and became good friends with them. A few years after they arrived, some developers acquired land and decided to build a golf course. In 1891, they brought over a Scottish golf pro, Willie Davis, and he designed the first 12 holes. 2 years later, they brought another Scots pro, Willie Dunn Jr., who designed 6 more holes. So then they had an 18-hole golf course. The labor they used was from members of the Shinnecock tribe on the hills, and John Shippen and his good friend, Native American Oscar Bunn, were among those who did the labor, helped build this course. And then they worked as caddies there and learned the game from Willie Dunn Jr., the Scotsman there. They became quite good. And in 1896, Shinnecock Hills was going to host the second U.S. Open. And the club members decided that John Shippen and Oscar Bunn were the best golfers there. They used to play money matches, and have them as their partners and would win their money, so they knew how good they were. They decided they should represent the club. And so they entered them and paid their entrance fees. Now, what we have to keep in mind is that just a few months before the U.S. Open was to take place was when the Supreme Court made its ruling in the Plessy versus Ferguson case, a case which ruled that segregated facilities, or separate but equal facilities, were indeed constitutional and legal, and that ushered in an era of legal segregation in the United States. This kind of attitude found its way to the golf course. And all of the other golfers who were from mostly England and Scotland, as I said, the professionals, decided to get up a petition against Shippen and Bunn's participation. And they gave the petition to Havemeyer, who was the, president. And supposedly Havemeyer told him, he says, well, if Shippen and Bunn are the only two there, the tournament will continue. Right? He refused to not let them play. The tournament went on with all of the other golfers showing up. Shippen came in 5th. Bunn came in 21st. Right? But significantly, what this was that Shippen has the distinction of being the first American-born professional golfer to participate in a match, and the first African-American golfer to make money playing golf. Bunn is known as the first Native American. He was not considered the first American-born golfer because Native Americans were not considered citizens until the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act was passed by Congress. So Bunn, although was also born in America, was not considered the first or one of the first American-born golfers. But this would make a turn, and this was very important, very significant moment in the history of golf and in the history of the United States. Now, people were continuing to play golf. It was continuing to spread. And a sign of how much it spread was shown in 1916, where what is considered one of the earlier black golf courses, occurred in Atlanta. And the Americas Times Recorder on 24th of March, 1916, an article entitled "Negro Golf Links Now in Atlanta," will give you a sense of what this was. It said, "It grew up overnight and is the first in the South and possibly the first in the world. They had appropriated the big vacant circus grounds on Auburn Avenue and Boulevard and has there established sundry tin cans sunk in the ground, fence lathes with rags on the end, and in fact has well imitated all usual appurtenances of the golf club. So far as known, they haven't converted the circus grounds into a golf course by any process of law, but are merely using it as their playground through the kindness of the owners and the tolerance of the city." So it was not an official golf course, but it was one that was created, and the players had probably been caddies and knew what golf courses should be, and so they created one, sinking tin cans in the ground for the cups, getting makeshift flags, and so forth, and played the game, right? This indicates how much the game was spreading and how much the interest in the game was spreading, not just among the elite and not just among whites, but among African Americans and all Americans ultimately. And this is what makes the Mapledale Country Club and Robert Hawkins so significant, because he was not, looking to just play in a field. He was not looking to have something that was jerry-rigged. He was looking to create something spectacular. And he had deep roots in New England. He had a life that was invested in the game of golf, and he wanted to make it more accessible to African Americans. As I said, he was born 9 years after Robert Shippen. He was born in 1888 in Adams, Massachusetts. So his roots are New England, are Massachusetts. By the time he was 8 years old, he started caddying at Forest Park Club in Adams, right? And so as you can see, starting at 8 years old, and if you know any 8-year-olds, you know how inquisitive they are, and how much they pay attention to things that they're interested in. And knowing all of the skills that caddies developed, you can imagine what he was learning and how deep that learning would become part of him. In 1902, his family moved to Vermont, and he caddied there at the Wabanaki Club in Burlington, where he rose to the position of caddy master, which reflects how much he was learning and the skills that he developed as a caddy. When he graduated high school in 1907, he became the general manager at Sandy Burr Country Club in Wayland. In 1922, he became that general manager. This was significant. He was the first black person in New England to attain such a position. And one fact I found out in the research was that the Wayland Club in 1921, when it was still new, held the first New England left-handed championship. I don't know if that continued to be a thing, but I'm sure it was. Being married to a left-hander, I can, say that things designed for left-handers is a very important thing. In 1926, and it may be from his work at, the Sandy Burr Club or whatever, he decided he was going to have a club exclusively for blacks. And in 1926, he purchased the 196-acre Randall Estate with the 20-room mansion here in Stow, Massachusetts. Now, I'm sure, and this is something that's still probably being thought about and wondered, why Stow? It was not, a place where there was a black community, right? But it may have been availability of land. It may have been that he thought that this was just a beautiful landscape or whatever, or it may have just been the availability of the estate. But he purchased it, and there he built what the newspaper said was a golf and country club exclusively for colored people, and it was the only one of its kind in the country. He designed and built a 9-hole golf course, and it was the first 9-hole golf course in the country designed, operated, and managed by an African American. This is a major part of golf history, a major part of American history, of Massachusetts history, of Stow history, of African American. I mean, this is a key event. Also, as it said, it wasn't just a golf club, it was a country club. It had swimming pool, tennis, trap and gallery shooting. He had croquet, quoits, and horseback riding. And in the winter, they had a toboggan run, right? He meant it to be an all-year-round thing. And the mansion he converted into a clubhouse with a restaurant and banquet hall and rooms where people may spend a day, week, or weeks, depending during vacation periods. Membership was a maximum of $25, minimum of $15, right? That's not bad. And, you know, it became a place to come to. I was reading about an organization that had a major event celebrating something about them in Boston, an African-American organization, and then they came out to Stow for their banquet at the mansion. Right. So it was very significant, and I'm sure, and it had ripples among the black population, not only in Massachusetts, but even further. Because one of the things that Robert Hawkins was also involved in was organizing black golfers. Right. He, as I said, he wanted to see golf spread among the African American community, and so he organized them. In 1925, he led the creation of the United Golf Association, which the UGA, which became the first black golf organization. And the first UGA tournament was held at Mapledale in 1926. It would then, the second and third, 1927 and 28, would also be held at Mapledale. This was major, and it attracted golfers from all over the country. A lot came from Chicago, from New York, from Maryland, from New Jersey, the DC area. They just came because this, you know, they put out the call, they organized it, and this was significant. And for his role in organizing the golfers and the UGA, he is often referred to as the father of Negro golf, right? Which is very, very significant. Now, the first tournament included a testimonial dinner to Robert Hawkins, and he was elected the first president of the UGA. By 1929, this tournament was known as the National Negro Open, and that, you know, resonated throughout the country. It was moved that year to the Shady Rest Golf Club in Westfield, New Jersey. And then as a sign of how national this organization was, that began right here in Stow. In the 1930s, they began to have tournaments in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. And in 1939, the tournament made its West Coast debut at the Cosmopolitan Golf Club in Los Angeles. So from Massachusetts to Los Angeles, in a little over 10 years, that's major, right? And this still had the footprint of Robert Hawkins on it. Now, another thing that the UGA did in expanding, in 1930, it developed a full women's division. And the first tournament for women was held that year at Casa Loma in Wisconsin. Had 16 competitors. right? African American women had been playing golf since the early 20th century at least, and they had actively supported black men in their efforts to access golf. They saw access to courses and to tournaments as making golf more equitable, and saw this also as a way of making the country more equitable and open. So women were a very important part of this story. Even when they weren't in the forefront, they were behind. They were supporting their husbands, they were supporting their friends, and then they were supporting themselves as well. And by the 1930s, they began creating their own organizations. An example of this was the Wake Robin Club in Washington, D.C., created in 1936. And it was organized to, quote, perpetuate golf among Negro women, to make potential players into champions, and to make a permanent place for Negro women in the world of golf. Right. This example was followed by African American women in other cities, and the spread of golf was very, very significant and very, very real. One of the things I found out that I, was not going to say a lot about today, but I'll mention, was that during the 1920s, golf was also spreading in urban areas. Not everyone could make it out to the countryside or whatever for golf. And so one of the ways that it was spreading, which was surprising to me, was this proliferation of miniature golf courses in the cities. In lots of places. I was reading about one dance club that had a miniature golf course on the roof or something like that. And it allowed people to play, to learn the game. It was a place where people could go practice their games. It was a place where lessons were given. But it was amazing how many of these golf courses, miniature golf courses, were springing up for people who wanted to play. The game was like, it was catching fire among a lot of people. Not everyone made it out to the countryside to play or to courses to play. One article I saw in the Asheville Times in North Carolina, 24th of January, 1929, and this is fitting for showing how golf was exciting. And we all know how stickball was played in the streets of cities and so forth. But this particular article's title was Negro Boys Use Street for Golf. And as the article said, one late January evening, 3 young black men, Charlie Green, Love Suber, and Calvin Thompson, were arrested in Asheville, North Carolina on charge of injuring property. The 3, who worked as caddies, were armed with golf sticks and golf balls and were having a great time playing an amateur game in the Buxton Hills Business District, shattering windows and causing glass to fly. The police confiscated their golf equipment and they were sentenced to 30 days working on the roads, but the court suspended the sentences with a warning. I just had these images of them, in the downtown area playing golf, and just having a good old time with it. And the fact that they had been caddies says a lot about how they learned the game, where they perhaps got their clubs, and so forth. So this is 1929. And this is the same year that, due to pressures, economic and otherwise, Robert Hawkins sold the country club. And that same year, the public course, Stow Golf and Country Club, opened. Now, Robert Hawkins probably continued to work there for a while, because in 1930, the census had him living at 264 Randall Road in Stow. He was listed as steward at a golf club. It also said that he owned his home, which was valued at $10,000, and he owned a radio. This is a little point that the census had in 1930. If you owned a radio, that was significant. this is the era of radios, right? This is, you know, if you remember, 1929 is the first talkie movie, but the era of radio shows was big during the 1930s. Everybody, you know, and you think of FDR's fireside chats, which were on radio. So the fact that the census made note of who owned a radio says something. And if you owned a radio, you were doing pretty well, you know. Sometime in the 30s, he moved from Stow in the early 30s. By 39, he was living in Framingham, probably earlier than that. In 1940, the census listed him as a steward and said he had worked for 52 weeks in 1939, earning a sum of $2,500, which in today's dollars is about $54,000. His wife also worked, and she made $364, which was $7,979 in today's money. During these years, he was employed at the Green Acres Country Club and was significant there. By 1950, however, due to health reasons, he had retired, it seems, by 1950. And he was living in Boston on Comm Avenue, but he was still doing some work as a steward in a private club. And I don't have a lot of details of him between there and 1973 when he was living in Dorchester on Woodcliff. 1973, May 12th, is when Robert Hawkins passed away at the age of 84. He died at a hospital in Tewksbury. His funeral was held at the Chisholm Funeral Home in Dorchester, Massachusetts. I tried to find out about the Chisholm home, but it's no longer in existence, and I couldn't track down what might have happened to their records or anything. But the search continues. The obituary that appeared in the Boston Globe on May 15, 1973, that Tuesday following his death, said, "He was one of the first blacks in New England to operate a country club, managing the Green Acres Country Club in Framingham from the early 1930s through the early 1940s. He was a chef at a number of clubs, private clubs, and he was often seen on the course at Green Acres. For a number of years, he managed Sandy Burr Country Club in Stow. He was also a member of the Masonic Lodge." Now, what's interesting is in that obituary, it doesn't mention Mapledale, which was, to me, one of the more significant things that he did. And so we can see that very early on, people were forgetting this amazing, amazing event, right? And even though the window in which it existed is small and short, it was powerful. And so the work we're doing to remember Mapledale is even more important than before. And to find how did it fall out of memory so easily? Because in some of the interviews with African American golfers, they talk about Robert Hawkins, they talk about Mapledale, right? But it didn't make it into many of the texts about golf, about history, right? And it just gets missed. And we're in the process of making sure that doesn't happen. One of the things we have to remember is that contributions of African Americans to the game of golf are an essential piece of the story of golf in the United States. Through labor and participation, they supported and aided the game's growth from the pastime of a few to the recreation of the many. In advocating for access to golf courses and tournaments, black golfers also contributed to the movement to create a more equitable society. And Robert Hawkins, the history of Robert Harrison Hawkins, and the Mapledale Country Club are a very important chapter in this history. By reinserting it in the story of golf, in the story of African American history, in the story of American history, we are doing a service to all who will follow. And that's all I have to say.
It's amazing.
Are there any questions or comments or, yes?
I've been working on this Mapledale history for many years, and one of the lots of peculiar things that have popped out, but one of them is that in the tax records of Stow, it shows Hawkins was taxed for this relatively big piece of land and this big house, which at the time was probably one of the biggest houses in Stow, if not the biggest house, and a bunch of livestock. Cows, horses, pigs.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? Did he kind of inherit all his livestock when he bought the property, or was this a side venture to try to supplement his income? I think some dairy cows maybe were involved. I don't know if he had any experience with agriculture, but it's just kind of a funny thing that pops up from these tax records.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if he inherited it or not, but in the 1930 census, one of the things it says, lived on a farm, yes, so I'm not sure if he was doing farming on the side or if, he just felt that was the best way to get fresh eggs and milk for the restaurant. I'm not sure. That's a wonderful question to look for, but he did have the animals there.
I think the land was so large that the records we have of the original 9 holes that were modified in 1953 was a fairly small part of this large acreage. So what I'm guessing is that the previous owners leased land out to people who were grazing cattle. And so maybe part of this income came from basically using this land for horticultural cattle. And just, putting land to use, because it seemed like it was way more acreage there than he used at the time.
And that may be, and one of the things that I need to look at more is his wife and what her background was, because one of the things I do know is that it was very common for African American women, men as well, but for women to have gardens and to raise chickens and to really do that to supplement and provide for the family, but also as almost I'll say spiritual endeavor, connecting with growing, and the process of growing was very, very significant to African Americans all over the East Coast. And so that may be part of what's connected to it, but I can't say it is. I have to look into that more.
You mentioned that after being here in Stow, the golfing kind of expanded to the Midwest and so on. Did they run into any problems there with a group of black golfers?
Well, what's interesting is that there were a number of golfers from the Midwest who came to those first tournaments. And one of the things, as the 1890s, when golf is taking off and beginning to grow, it's also coinciding with the beginning of the black migration out of the South into cities and into particularly Chicago, New York. And it's interesting that a number of the golfers who came to Mapledale for those first few tournaments were from New York, from Chicago. And so the numbers were there. Did they run into problems? Yes. There were cases of them not being allowed to play on courses there, of them challenging that and having protests around that. So yes, it wasn't like it was open, for them. But there were a lot there, and they formed their own organizations and began really pushing for equitability in golf. Any other? Yes.
So I was just struck when you were talking about the sort of early history of golf in America and how and how there was a sense that maybe it wouldn't take off. But you were also talking about some of the other early sports in America, almost all of which were team sports. And I was wondering if you think there's any connection between the unexpected popularity of golf and sort of the general American culture of individualism and the idea that that the individual is, prioritizing the individual might be more important. This is not about Hawkins specifically, but I just was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I would say probably yes, that individualism was something, the nature of the game was something, and I just, a few days ago I was at home and the movie Bagger Vance was on. And one of the things that stood out to me was talking about how in golf you're not really playing against other people. You're playing the course, you're playing yourself. And, those elements may have been connected to why. And you're in the outdoors, golf courses are beautiful. When I think of one of the things that in Ken Burns' wonderful film, Baseball, they talk about what the baseball field is like, and you're outdoors on this green grass, and how, it's almost like a spiritual event. And I'm sure golf also has that role, right? And so, yeah, I would say that may be part of its spread. But there was also this effort made to get people interested in it, articles that were written. And there were interesting articles written specifically for women and by women about golf. I read an article about golf fashions, right, geared towards women. And one that said that golf was good for women because it helped them. Let me see if I can find that particular quote, because I don't want to butcher it. And it's was one that said something that I was like, it was being advocated as good for women as for men because it provided physical exercise, recreation, and improvement to health, and, quote, an opportunity for the practice of self-control and self-government. Now, I'm not sure what they all meant by that, but it captured my attention. I was like, And another article was saying how if a woman was well organized, she could complete her housework in the morning and still have time to go out to the links in the afternoon. So the articles and the way that it was pushing, golf is very interesting, and saying how it was good exercise for people. There were efforts made to push golf as an activity for everyone. And then when courses like public courses opened, like Franklin Park, there was a lot of talk about how it was open for everyone and people should come and play. So yeah, it spread because there were folks pushing it. And I'm not sure if the makers of golf clubs had anything to do with that, but it's possible.
Thank you so much. This was excellent.
I saw one more hand. Yes.
Well, I was just wondering if you personally have experienced the spiritual practice of golf.
Well,
I haven't, so
my interaction with golf has mostly been academic. So I can't say that I have experienced that. I did take some whacks at golf balls when I was a kid, but I haven't actually ever played golf.
I don't know the eyesight. You have to have good eyesight to play golf.
Oh, that's something I didn't realize. I do plan to get out there one day, and I'm sure I will learn a lot. I had a friend who had friends who played, and they kept convincing him to come out, and so he finally went out to play with them. And he after a couple times out, he was beating them, and they stopped letting him know when they were going to play. He was getting into it, he wanted to play, and he'd find out, oh, they already left, so I don't think that will be my experience, but I'm looking forward to trying.
August 26th.
Yeah.
Right at Stow Country Club, we'll be having a golf tournament this year.
Yes, our first charity golf tournament for Rediscover Mapledale. Hopefully first of May.
Yes.
All right. Now, my brother played, and I think he found a spiritual nature in it because he kept golf clubs in his car, and he played everywhere. He came to visit me in Lexington, and I said, what are you doing today? He goes, oh, I've got a tee time at the course over there. And I'm like, wait a minute. And he would always, wherever he was going, he would look up what golf courses were there and set up a tee time so he could play. So he really found something in it, yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Bellinger. That was amazing.
Thank you.